I'm Kanan Chandran, the publisher of StormAsia.com, and this is our regular web chat series. It started off with COVID and has continued and will continue. So we've done about 55 of these sessions, 45-minute discussions on topics far and wide, very varied. And today's session is on writing books. In the era of the internet and social media, do people still want to read? They seem to prefer watching videos of mishaps and cats and reading short snips of info, right? They don't seem to want to read big books or thick books. Generally, a lot of people are complaining of short attention spans, and things tend to get forgotten a fortnight or so after it takes place because a new topic emerges, a new issue comes up. So what is the role of the writer in today's society? And what's the process of an idea turning into a book? We've got two authors, as I mentioned today. One has written many books on many topics, another has written a book about his life, and now one has written about the other. And it's quite an interesting take on things, right? So we've got Woon Tai Ho, who wrote his first book, To Paint a Smile, in 2008. The book's about renowned artist Hsien, and it's a fascinating read because it weaves in art, philosophy, politics, and society. His latest book is Transitions, the Story of PN Balji, who is our other panelist. And it's a book that will be launched on the 21st of May, so in a few weeks' time. Our other panelist is PN Balji, a journalist with more than 40 years of experience. He's worked in 5 newspapers in Singapore. His book, The Reluctant Editor, offered insights into the controlled Singapore media scene. So now, welcome, Balji, to this session as well.
Thank you.
And for the two of you, it must be an interesting thing. As I mentioned earlier, it's one writing about the other. Tai Ho, how did this idea of transitions come about?
It started with me. It was one birthday before, that means 1 year ago. And someone suggested that I started writing a book on Balji. And I started meeting him every week on a Monday. And then I found myself actually writing down what the session was about. And over time, I just feel that this is a good story to tell. Balji has lived and worked through the prime ministership of Kuan Yew, Tong, Hsien, Loong, and now the 4th generation. And he has also, he's also older than Singapore. He came to Singapore 1 year old, and he was the son. And then he got married to his wife. He's the husband. He was the husband. And then he has 2 daughters, became a father, and now he has 2 grandsons, so he's the grandfather. So the transition from son to grandfather in itself is a very good story to tell. So I found myself looking at transition at 2 levels. One is a personal level, transition of a man, and then the transition of a country. So midway through the book, that was how I saw the book developing. And with that idea, it started to move along the path of transitions on 2 levels. And before I know it, I have 10 to 11 chapters. Balji.
Okay. So Balji, what was it like for you? I mean, you just written your book, Reluctant Editor, and suddenly Tai Ho wants to talk to you about probably many of the things that you'd also discussed in Reluctant Editor. Were you reluctant to do a book so soon after that?
I was actually reluctant to do a book, another book, whether it's soon after or not, but I was reluctant to do a book because this book was more about, the first book, Reluctant Editor, was about my profession. And of course, as you rightly said, it was about the government control on media. So that was essentially the book. And when I was writing that book, a couple of my friends told me, no, you must also write about your parents and your private life. I said no, because this is a book solely for about journalism, Singapore journalism, and there's so much to write. Most of it is spoken about, but never put down in print. So this would be an opportunity, the first book I'm talking about. The second book was, I'm not sure you know, but Tai Ho is a great persuader. Over a long period of time, he persuaded me that I should write the book and why. And I kind of, I would say, grudgingly agreed, because he convinced me that there was a story to tell. And we journalists or ex-journalists love to tell stories. So he convinced me, and I must say that I have been as truthful as I can be without really hurting anybody about my personal life. And it talks about my my arranged marriage, which not many people know. And Tai Ho wanted to interview my wife. I said, yeah, I can't stop you from interviewing her, but I thought she won't talk to him. But she did talk. And Tai Ho said that, oh my God, she said so many things, about you, about me. So, what she thought of me when we first married, never spoke to each other before marriage, and how the relationship has developed over the years, or as Tai Ho will say, how love has developed over the years. So, I mean, yeah, I think it is, in the end, it looks like, to me, satisfying and happy kind of ending.
Did you learn anything about yourself through this process, talking about your life and remembering things?
To a certain extent, I did. But this thing about my own life has been in my mind, boiling in me for a while, for a long time, especially after I left mainstream journalism. I'm maybe it's a bad habit. I keep thinking about a lot of things that have happened in the past, whether it's my friends or whether it's my family, whether it's my mother, whether it's my father, my brother, my sisters. So these were all there, in my mind, swirling, occasionally comes out. And even just one anecdote to give, that how that was the first time and last time I defied my mother's wish, and that was to move out of our family home. Because I had got married, I have a young daughter who was about 4 years old, I think, and my brother was getting married. We were all living in the same household. And I told my mother, I'm leaving out, I'm leaving. And she said, no, you can't. She was, full of tears flowing down, her eyes. And I remember still telling her, this is many years ago, maybe 40 over years ago, we can have 10 kings in the house. We cannot have more than one queen. I never forgot that. Of course, I said it in Malayalam. And I still remember that. So these were some of the things that, and I thought they were important for a lot of people to know, not just because what it is, it's about me, but also it then forced me to look for a house, which we did. And we have been living in this house for 40 over years. And I don't call it a house anymore, it's a home.
Yeah, the book is really about the institution of family. And a part of it is about the role of women, friends and relatives. But a huge chunk of the book is also about retirement and how one finds his or her second act. That is quite a big and important part of the book. Yeah. So there's the institution of family, there's the institution of state, and both are transiting in parallel. And then in small but important parts is really the institution of family and how Balji struck out his second act.
Now, when you're writing this book, do you have an audience in mind?
I have a Singaporean audience in mind. I don't think I see the person with an age group. I just someone who's interested in a Singapore story. So, but as I was progressing, as I was writing the book, I think that I also see a foreign audience in mind, principally someone from India, for example. It's really for an interested adult, and strangely, my previous book has actually been read by very young people, so it's also for young people.
Okay. Do you get different reactions to books? Both of you, since you've both written books, do you find the reactions of your generation and those of the younger generation different, or are they sort of tracking along similar lines?
I think they're similar. Balji?
Yeah, I can talk about my first book, which is Reluctant Editor. Most of the reactions, or most of the people who read it, are people who know me and people who are in the profession, and some of them outside the profession but interested in the profession. And I don't think there was an age divide.
Yeah.
Because they saw it as and some of them, most of them felt, oh, I didn't know such things happen. But there were not many, but examples of one chapter where I think where Lee Kuan Yew was upset with one thing that I did. In a way, I kind of defied his order. And when I hit to publish a story, when I was in the New Nation, and how angry he was, and he got his press secretary, Mr. James Wu, to call Peter Lim, who was my editor-in-chief, and his words were, or Lee Kuan Yew's words were, who is that person practicing Western-style journalism? And I really felt I would lose my job. I didn't, because we had people like Peter Lim, who was my editor-in-chief, as I said, and the CEO, Mr. Lin Holloway, who were very protective of me. And I still remember Mr. Lin Holloway, after the whole episode was over, coming down to my office, putting his arm around my shoulders and saying, Balji, don't worry, we have taken care of it. I'm not sure we have such bosses around anymore, but I'm not in that space, so I can't comment. So that there were reactions that came, good reactions, not always good reactions. And in fact, one of the people who reacted was a very good friend of mine. He said, yeah, now that you have left the profession, you can say whatever you want, right? It's not necessarily a bad point.
Actually, this book is also about a journalist who has retired and what he can say now that he's no longer working for a media institution. The book starts out in a Q&A format, and I did that to actually get as many readers as possible, because it's a Q&A format, it's fast, so that when you read the Q&A format, and it sort of sets the book up quite nicely. It touches on everything that I wanted to ask Balji, and in a tough way. And quite a bit of what Balji has just said is actually in the Q&A.
You say that you're a retired journalist, so you can say what you want to say. I beg to differ. I think once you're a journalist, and especially one with an opinion that people pay heed to, no matter what you say, where you say it, people will still listen to it. And now with social media, it's no longer the prescribed avenues and channels. Is everything out there, right? So do you still feel that you can say what you want to say, or do you have a sort of a more guarded perspective when you put things out online?
And can I answer that question?
Yeah, that's for you.
That's for me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that you raise a very relevant point, And when I think what Tai Ho meant with those words is that when you are in a media company, you have to follow the rules of the media company too. So in the case of SPH, all the government people, civil servants, ministers, their first port of call is Seng, who was the editor and then later editor-in-chief. And when Seng gives a guarantee or says, okay, that means all the editors down the line, because we are not going to defy our editors' wish, right? So we will listen to him, although we disagree. Sometimes there have been great arguments in the boardroom, with him. And I also remember one moment where he got so angry with us. I'm talking about Seng, that he threw the file on the table, his famous brown file. He threw it on the table and didn't walk out, just threw it on the table. But 10 minutes later, the meeting ended. And all of us, all the editors who were present, knew that Cheong will never hold this against us. That when we go out of the room, we will follow what Cheong wants us to do. But we wanted to push him too, you see. Of course, people like Leslie Fong and Patrick Daniel, they were all pushing Cheong to articulate to him, this you shouldn't have agreed to. So that's because we were constrained by that. But now we are not constrained by that. But having said that, it doesn't mean it's a free for all. I honestly don't believe so. It is, I've always, when people talk to me about press freedom, I ask them, isn't responsibility of the press more important or as important? And for me, the responsibility means that you have to present both sides of the viewpoint, but you can take a stand, which may be an anti-government stand, and argue your case, but you have presented both sides, right? So it is, as I said, it's not a free-for-all, but less of an encumbrance now than it was before.
In the book, it's called The Second Act. Balji talks about a new kind of freedom and a new kind of independence, which means that he does not need to explain himself to a boss. But more importantly, he has to be accountable to himself. So this is the new kind of independence. And that he has to account to himself.
So with that sort of thing, some may say it's conditioning. Over the years, over the decades of being in the system and knowing what is likely to push you over the edge and get into trouble, you tend to be very mindful that the precipice is there and you walk a clearly defined path. Does that still weigh on you when you write your commentaries and your books?
Okay. Again, a very good question. You know the media too well. I think that's why you ask such questions. But it's a very good question. Let me try and answer it. It's a different kind of control, if you ask me. True. I would say it's self-control. Self-control in the sense that you believe that this is the way journalism should be practiced. Now, if you look at our situation, media situation, on the one side, you have the mainstream media, especially the Straits Times, which everything the government says is right. Then on the other extreme is everything the government says is wrong, which is essentially the social media. But there is a centrist path, which is that path that I'm trying to follow. I'm not successful all the time, but is to give a good argument, which may have sometimes very strong language, but in a more measured way. And I think that's the kind of media that Singapore needs, which we don't have enough of.
Also in the second act,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, go
also in
ahead.
the second act, actually is what Balji has just said. And in the annex of the book, we have up to 10 articles written by Balji for the New Singapore. And many of his arguments are there in the annexes. That means he's written from year 2019, 2020, after the election, until the last one.
Okay. So the thing I want to find out also is if you're trying to walk down that central path, right, between all ye and all nay, a system that is so used to dictating what it wants to you, is it willing to listen to what you've got to say? So do the powers that be pay heed to the things that you write? And
I have not asked them because I have no communication with them,
okay.
but I suspect they don't. I suspect they don't. Why? Because the PAP leadership is very thin-skinned. They cannot take criticism, but what can they do to me? They can. I mean, I have occasionally thought that there will be a midnight knock on my door, right? But I am convinced that won't happen, especially after 1987. When the last ISA arrest of political detainees happened, the so-called Marxist plot. I doubt that will happen because that caused a lot of trauma down the line. Even some ministers, at least one minister, quit because of that arrest. So I'm quite convinced that it won't happen. I'm also quite convinced that legally they won't go after me because I have not done anything that is, and I'm very careful about that, to make sure that that I don't commit a libel. And the third point is that I'm also very, very careful about making errors in the copy. So till today, I have not got a libel letter, a letter to sue me in court, or to say you did this wrong, or this is not right. So on those fronts, I'm quite okay. I don't think the government listens because they don't consider me or my voice as a loud voice. They will still get their 70% votes, which is what.
He write for Singaporeans. I think he does not write for the political elite, And again, this question of getting a knock in the middle of the night is actually a question that I asked him at the beginning of the book during the Q&A session, and actually Balji admitted that he came very close to getting a midnight knock on the door. And there was one time you can actually call that knock a midnight knock, but I'll leave you to read the book.
Tai Ho, I don't remember that. I'm getting old.
So that is why the book begins with a Q&A. It says, I asked him whether he thinks about the midnight knock. He thinks about who does he talk to about his fears or his reservations. And in the end, of course, he writes for Singaporeans. He does not write for an elite.
Yeah. Are the Singaporeans listening though?
We need to do a survey, man. No, I'm just.
I think the interested Singaporeans, people who are interested about political matters, they do listen. Yeah. But one of Balji's regrets with modern Singapore is that more and more Singaporeans do not or are not interested in politics anymore because they are more interested in living well, small things, So there is a part under the topic identity, and Balji is wondering whether he should retire or he should spend more time in India, in Kerala. And of course, that again, I would leave you to read the book.
Okay. I see a few comments and questions coming through. That's good. Please do send them through, and we'll try and get into them shortly. Well, apparently people are listening, and including young Singaporean listening. That's very good. I think it's history to some extent, right? What you're doing, because it's trying to understand what's taken place from the perspective of somebody who's been in the thick of it and not necessarily written by the victors, right? So how different do you think your version of what's taken place is going to be compared to, say, with the establishment books that have been coming out? There's been lots of books about Lee Kuan Yew, a few about Chok, Tong. Well, nothing much yet on the others. There's been one on the party, but really, how would your books be important in helping the reader get a better understanding of the full picture?
I hope you have to answer this question.
One of Balji's biggest criticism of this government or Singapore today is what he calls the group think. And he is wondering if there is someone, his position is, if Singapore is going to get out of this so-called group think, there must be some kind of, there must be a rebellious personality in the party, or a few rebellious personality in the party to make, or to move the PAP along a way that is more aligned to the new aspirations of Singapore. And in this instance, I think he has a certain view about the fourth generation leaders, which he does not think very highly of, but he did predict in the book earlier in the year that probably Lawrence Wong would be the next prime minister, even before Heng Swee Keat was unseated. So his views now, Balji is in the process of actually writing a commentary on Lawrence Wong. And it's too late for the book now, but we want that particular commentary for the second print of the book.
Tai Ho has covered nearly all the points, but my biggest concern and worry about Singapore is that it is facing so many challenges, which are not like what happened during LKY. I mean, not like during Goh Chok Tong's time or Lee Hsien Loong's time. Now we are, after COVID, after now the Ukraine war in process. I don't know what else will come in. I mean, we need a leader or stroke leaders who have a rebellious streak in them. By that I mean that they will be able to say, no, this is the way to go. It is not in our PAP playbook, but this is the way to go. To a certain extent, the way what Lee Kuan Yew did. I'm not saying that exactly like that, but to have a mind of the prime minister, the future prime minister must have a mind of his own and must be able to convince the cabinet that this is the way to go, and must be able to convince the Singaporeans that this is the way to go. Because the challenges are enormous. But one good thing that the Singapore government has, and I think will have in the future, is a vast sum of reserves to spend. I mean, without that reserves, could we have got out of COVID as quickly as we did? I have my doubts. I think we must be the only country to have spent more than $100 billion to kind of save the economy. How many countries have that kind of savings to do it? So Singapore, but my view is that they cannot, the present leadership cannot just count on the money, and we will see. We will see.
The money is quite an important aspect of how this country is run, right? I don't see that changing too much. But you were talking about getting a rebel in the midst. Would a rebel even get a chance to knock on the door?
A closeted rebel can.
Closeted.
A closeted rebel can. But I'm not saying, I mean, I hope I didn't give the wrong impression. I'm not saying a rebel for a rebel's sake.
Yep.
I think he must have that thinking that, okay, we have followed this all the while. Now I want to change that. I mean, as an example, I mean, to a certain extent, the way the government has gone about agreeing to imposing sanctions on Russia, right? It says it's based on principle. I hope the historians will write about it, whether it was really based on principles or something else. But I'm talking about something which is completely out of the way, which is not the same old way, that we want to be different. Can we come out with solutions? Can we continue to beat the drum? As an example, just as an example, that GST is a must. Isn't there other ways? Right? Isn't there other ways to raise revenue? Land sales, taxing, I mean, the land sales is not tax at all. Where does that money go? Right? What about wealth tax? Of course, government says, oh, wealth tax is very complex, I don't understand why is it so complex when it was around many years ago. But is it the real story that they don't want to introduce wealth tax to frighten the foreigners who are coming here or already here? I don't know. I'm just throwing up these things. So somebody has to have that mindset. I want to change things. A friend asked me last week, don't you think that we should allow refugees from Ukraine into Singapore? We never allowed refugees, right? We actually towed the boats away, Vietnamese refugees, and then set them out into the sea. Whether they perished or not was not the government's intention. At that time, okay, Singapore was a small country, but now we are bringing in people from overseas, And are there some talented people among these refugees who could come here? Maybe there are musicians there. So not to close the Singapore of the future should not close its mind to anything. I think that should be the approach.
Okay, just let's look at a few of the questions that have come in. Irene Ho is asking, why don't you think the 4G is? Why don't you think highly of the 4G?
Why don't I think highly of the 4G? I think Irene Ho knows the answer, but she wants to kind
of. We'd all like to hear it too.
No, I know. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to answer. She just wants to needle me. Okay, that's what friends are for, right?
Yes.
Why? Because they don't have, let's take Chok Tong and Lee Hsien Loong, I think they grew up in a totally different era. They had the Go Keng Swees of this world, they had the JY Pillays of this world, and there was so many of these people that they could test their ideas on. Who do they have now? Right? I think that is one very important question. Secondly, this group of people also grew up in a totally different environment. I have 2 grandsons. One is 13, one is 9. Some of the things that they say and do, I can only bite my tongue, because I'm not their father, right? I just have to find some way to not get angry and then find some way to talk to them maybe a few hours later, right? But even how much you talk to them, I can see on their faces that they don't understand it. Not because they are trying to define me, they just have no concept of what, whether it is saving money, not just spending money on anything. So I think we don't have that type of leaders anymore. Hopefully somebody will emerge. If there was an open challenge to the leadership issue, maybe somebody would have emerged.
Perhaps, Balji, perhaps in the interest of time, I think people want to hear what your views are of Lawrence Wong.
Oh, my views of Lawrence Wong.
I think it's a hot it's a hard question because I think
okay.
and it's something that we want to keep for the second print. But please tell us something.
I will try and give you a. Normally, I don't give this kind of diplomatic answers, but let me try and give you a diplomatic answer. It might be difficult.
No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be diplomatic.
It should be an honest answer.
Yeah, there are never honest answers, Kannan. You know that. Right?
It's all perspective, right?
Okay, let me
honest as you can.
Let me put the perspective first. I have worked when there were 3 prime ministers. I've met all 3 of them, and they are very different in many ways. And I've said to a question by Tai Ho, which is in the book, who was the prime minister I liked the best? I said, Chok. He asked me why. I say, because at that time, what I see of the man, my own experiences with him, he was very, he was very genuine, right? 2, he was prepared to go against the Lee Kuan Yew philosophy of leadership. Lee Kuan Yew's philosophy of leadership was to be a tough man. I don't care what. You just go with my way. I don't care whether I was right or wrong. You just go my way. Chok, I think from a purely political strategy, was a good strategy. I want to be different. I want to build consensus, and he moved, and he succeeded. I must say he succeeded, because once you move in that direction for about 14 years, I think, it was very difficult for the next prime minister to bring it back to the Lee Kuan Yew era. So, I salute him for that. But your question is on Lawrence, right? Lawrence Wong. I don't have any experience with him. I can only base it on what I see, what people who know him tell me. So let me say this. I think 1, he is a good communicator, at least from what I've seen on TV. The way he has handled the COVID situation, he has done a pretty good job. I look at him as a finance minister. I think he has done pretty well. But my big question mark is when it comes to the crunch, and we have to make really hard decisions without the reserves, how will he perform? I have a question mark on that.
I think that's everybody in a test, isn't it?
Sorry?
That's a test for most leaders, right?
Of course, yeah. But the other leaders didn't have to face that kind of test. Yeah. Not like what this present leadership is facing.
But you
Tai Ho, you were asking?
Well, is able to rise above that?
Who?
Lawrence Wong, yeah. Do you think he has the wherewithal to rise above that? Because you see,
I really don't know.
Lee Kuan Yew rose above that. Chok became a different man, became his own man. Lee Hsien Loong, but the 4th generation, you think?
Well, you said Lee Hsien Loong and then you shook your head, right? You didn't say exactly what. Never mind. So your question is, will Lawrence Wong be like a Lee Kuan Yew?
Yeah, can he?
Very unlikely, because Lee Kuan Yew grew up in a totally different era, so the situation was very different. I think
one of your biggest problems is that this generation is the privileged generation.
In a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I can see it in my home. But I think if you ask me the question that can Lawrence Wong be like Chok, I think he has a good chance.
Okay.
I think he has a good chance.
So you feel there is hope in the 4th generation?
Sorry, I have?
You have hope in the 4th generation to lead Singapore into the next phase?
It's a difficult question. Let me answer the question from a very personal point of view. I think Tai Ho touched on it. If I have great belief in the 4th generation leadership, I don't think I would set up a second home outside Singapore. Right? And it is not really blaming the leadership, but I think Singapore has become very, very, not very, very, but has become ageist. although it is trying very hard to be friendly to the elderly. I'm 73, 74 years old, and I find very difficult to live in Singapore. You know, I feel squeezed at two angles, you know, from a physical space and from a political space, right? When I was when I was working with people like Peter Lim and Seng and Leslie Fong, you know, there was many occasions when the editors will fight privately to convince the leadership that maybe this is not the way to go. But if the leadership decides, no, I've listened to you and this is the way to go, then they will fall in line, right? But they fought. And I've been there on these sessions. You know? In fact, there is one very, very good example where Leslie Fong, in my first book, where Leslie Fong fought George Yew tooth and nail over a comment piece that was written in the Straits Times. And he ended off the conversation, the lunch conversation, by saying that, Minister, we know our blood is on the floor, not your blood. And the meeting ended there. So I don't think there are editors like that. And so you will, and I think that the 4G leadership needs that, from a media point of view also, needs that kind of test. If it's not done publicly, at least private. And I doubt it's done even privately.
I want to say something now, and that is that a lot of what you hear about, or a lot of what you hear this afternoon from Balji is in the book.
So no need to buy the book, is it?
No.
Let's keep watching this episode over and over again.
Yeah, this is what is in the book. It's about retirement in Singapore. It's about someone's second act, and it is at once personal as well as the country. So it's the institution of family and the institution of state, the transition of both.
Yeah, there's one other aspect which I consider very important, and which one of the young journalists who met Tai Ho and me and I said he was surprised. My views on women.
Yeah.
You know, just as a brief, you know, as a teaser so that you will buy the book. I always say I lived with 3 women, 1 wife and 2 daughters. You know? And I was the first son in a family of 5 girls. And you know how I was treated. I was treated like a princeling, you know. Everything I wanted was given to me. But after my marriage, I began to change. I don't know what was the moment of change, but I changed. And maybe because I have 2 daughters, maybe because I didn't want them to go through what my sisters went through. And one of the key decisions I made was to make sure that my wife took up driving, because she didn't have to depend on me. And that point came many years ago when I was in New Nation, and we had a sub-editor called Roderick Pestana. I'm not sure how many of you know him. Roderick was such a gentleman, but he passed away suddenly one day when I think he was about 40s, and his wife was at a loss. She didn't know where his bank books were, where his money was, nothing. And I told myself, this will never happen to my wife. So the first instance was to get her to take up driving. She didn't have to wait for me. She became, as Tai Ho says, my CFO, who invested all the money that I earned, not all, most of it, and I could retire at the age of 53.
This is all in chapter 4 under the topic respect.
Okay, yeah.
It's Aretha Franklin's respect.
Okay, in respect of time, because we are 45 past the 45-minute mark of this discussion.
Sure.
One last question. What is a book that you would like to write about? Both of you. Tai Ho?
Eventually, I think I'm going to write about myself. But I don't think about it at all. when it comes, it comes. But I'm taking little notes and putting it away in some place. So at some point, it may be 10 years, 20 years from now.
Okay.
Yeah, I never wanted to write books. Somehow I wrote a reluctant editor, the first book. Then somehow Tai Ho convinced me to be part of this book. And somehow I may write another book. But if I do, I think it will be about my grandsons. Growing up in this complex country. And I have a kind of a dim view of what their future is. I'm not convinced that the future that I had, they will have. So maybe that's a book that I will write.
Okay, great. It's good to know it's not going to be another one on Lee Kuan Yew. But Tai Ho and Balji, thanks for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and the audience as well for those questions and the comments. Good to see all of that. As somebody commented, wish we had more time, but I like to keep it short so we focus.
No,
we get a lot done in this time, I think.
Yeah. You can do a part 2.
We can, of course.
No.
As you might do another book, and Tai Ho, you might do part 2 of Transition, the Story of PN Balji, going to be launched on the 21st of May. Look out for that. And all the best in future endeavors. Thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you.